Welcome. Today we're very, very lucky to have Julian Raven, author of Odious and
Cerberus.
Cerberus, Odious and Cerberus, which is a memoir of his confrontation with the Smithsonian Institution over his portrait of President Trump, getting it into the presidential collection there, which turned it into, as you say, an odyssey of many years involving lawsuits and some very big names like Chief Justice John Roberts and Vice President Mike Pence. And the foreword is by Craig Shirley, who was an advisor to President Reagan. And Cleta Mitchell at one point was consulted. She's the one doing all the election litigation. If you read the book, people from the Trump campaign and all sorts of different people involved in Washington society, but really it's a story of a fight between one man, Julian Raven, and one woman, Kim Saget, who was the director of the National Portrait Gallery, and how she called him up and said, we're never going to take this picture, so just forget about it. And in the end, he learned how Washington works, that whatever the rules are, whatever the laws are, whatever the principles might be, that in fact, when you have one dedicated bureaucrat who wants to stop you, they're experts at stopping you in 1,000 different ways. And this portrait of President Trump never was shown in the Smithsonian, although it was shown in a lot of other places. And very, very famous. And I believe you, in the book, you took it even a copy to Trump headquarters. So the Trump family saw it as well. So a very well-known artist with very well-known picture that was very controversial, but unlike Piss Christ, unlike Tilted Arc, and unlike Karen Finley or Ron Athey or the big names you've heard, the censored artists, Julian Raven was censored by the establishment, and he didn't get any help from the American Civil Liberties Union, and he didn't get any help from Americans for the Arts, and he didn't get any help from the Penn International Center, and he didn't get any help from any of the people who are supposedly for artistic freedom or freedom of expression or anything else, you know? And a very brave man. In addition, I believe you're a lay Christian pastor as well, and guided by a faith in Christ with a very interesting life story described in here. Came from a English, Spanish, Jewish background, and was a rock and roller with, now I understand, 3 clubs in Marbella at the height of the wild sex, drugs, and rock and roll period. So he knows, as he said, about the dark side. And like many sinners, he got saved, and now he's trying to save others. And he's become a full-time artist. You can see behind him, his artwork is actually now very inspirational, full of flowers and sweetness and light, which of course is not very fashionable among the powers that be. But it may be time for a change in the art world as well, and maybe we need a reformation where the idols are smashed and replaced with people might enjoy watching. With that introduction, and he has a website, I'll put a link in the comment section. I will also tell you this book is available online from Amazon, from Barnes & Noble, I guess through your own website, which I'll put a link to, and is in hardback and paperback. Do you have a Kindle edition?
Yes.
There's a Kindle edition. Will there be an audiobook?
Yes.
There will be an audiobook too. So you can get it in any way. And who knows, maybe someone will make a docudrama for it someday. You never know. And who will play you? Some British actor, we don't know yet. Who knows? Maybe not even, maybe Mel Gibson will play you. It's a possibility, you know, you never know. All right, that said, why don't you briefly tell us how you came to be a lone artist shut out of the Smithsonian, and what the basis of the struggle was, if you can tell us very briefly.
Well, good morning, Larry, and thank you for having me on. It's been an interesting ride, that's for sure, and it continues. The book is obviously just another chapter in this odyssey that I'm on. But in a nutshell, just after this very interesting political experience that I had as a immigrant to the United States, at the time I was a resident, I had become a legal alien, and then I had become a citizen in 2015 in September, right around the time I was finishing the actual painting that I painted. So I embarked on this sort of, political adventure, this sort of naive foreigner, diving into the American political experience, which was really, really wonderful. I mean, it took me across the country. I showed the painting from Iowa to California and back across New York State. And so I had a wonderful time. I learned so much, met so many wonderful people across the country. And
Let
then
me stop you for a second. This is
Yes.
a picture of Donald Trump, and you're showing it across the country during the Trump campaign in 2016. Is that right?
2015 it started, and very early, and most people thought I was like crazy, right when he didn't really have the support at the beginning. And then all the way through 2016, right up to the convention in Ohio, in Cleveland, Ohio. It was really something that took me deep into the heart of the political experience here in America. And after this tremendous year that's documented, obviously, in the book, and this exciting cross-country adventure, President, then it was candidate-elect Trump, or candidate Trump became President-elect Trump. And I was like amazed, because what I had believed would happen did. And then I was like, what am I going to do with this painting? And the question was answered to me, because I had met so many people across the country who had said to me, well, this painting needs to be in the Smithsonian. And not knowing exactly what that meant, I began to research, what am I going to do? How am I going to get this in the Smithsonian? What is the Smithsonian? Where is the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C.? And before long, I found the National Portrait Gallery. I found out that the Obama Hope poster had been exhibited for the inauguration of President Obama in 2009 and 2013. And I was like, wow, this is great. They show presidential portraits that were part of a campaign. This is fantastic. It guarantees they're going to show my painting. It was just one of those things. I had shown my painting in California with the same version of the Obama Hope poster. That was the inspiration of Yossi Sergent, who was the mind behind the Obama Hope poster that was created by Shepard Fairey. So I was given this opportunity to then approach them and say, hey, here's my painting. This is what I did. This is the support. I had support from all New York State politicians. It was a publicly supported application to the People's Museum as a tribute to then this historic event of the incredible win of Donald Trump to become the president-elect of the United States. Wow, what a wonderful way to celebrate that in the arts, and to then show my portrait, which was at that time the most recognized portrait of the president, or candidate, I should say. And yet I came up against this institutional Trump derangement syndrome. I had no idea that what would happen, but I did end up getting a phone call from Kim Sayet, who for 11 minutes we engaged in an argument, a heated argument, as she gave all these arbitrary invented objections to why the portrait gallery would not accept my portrait. And then at the end of it, frustrated because I had rebutted all of her, her objections, I then, I'm ready to move forward. And she's like, well, I'm the director of the National Portrait Gallery. Your application will go no further. You can appeal it all you want. And she hangs up the phone. So that was the beginning of the challenge, where this woman then challenged me to appeal her arbitrary decision to bar me from the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. And that, Larry, is what led me into the years-long battle that I continue on today.
Well, that's a very good summary, and I thank you for it. What's most amazing to me is at this time, the election has happened. Trump is the president, and the board of the Smithsonian, which in principle is above the director, has some major Republicans on it, including Chief Justice Roberts and others, and yet they have no interest in helping it.
Yeah, I appealed to the book, because when she said, "Oh, you can appeal it all you want," it was a challenge. It was like, "Oh, well, what do I do?" And that's how I write about that, this sort of the journey of this. I just said, simple guy, an artist from upstate New York. I just became a citizen. I had no experience about what I was dealing with, but the challenge really provoked me. It provokes my personality, is really engaged by that. And so I was like, okay, so now what am I going to do? And I found out, oh, there's a board of regents at the Smithsonian. And then I'm like, who's on the board? And you're like, oh my goodness, look who's on the board of regents. And there were not just Chief Justice Roberts, but there are 3 members of the Senate and 3 members of the House. And some of those were Republicans as well. And so I appealed. I sent an appeal to all of them individually. It was like 17 members of the Board of Regents, and I sent them copies of the print. And my experience of this treatment that I received, this unbelievable treatment from this director, who is a fiduciary responsible person in the museum. And they basically handed it off to someone else who kicked me to the curb. It was Dr. Richard Curran, whom I write about as well in the book. And so that whole experience continued to push me that, okay, so the Smithsonian now has cast me aside. Where can I go now to appeal? And that's what led me then to file my federal lawsuit and begin my climb that ended up at the Supreme Court.
Now, let me interrupt again. What's interesting is you filed your case acting as your own lawyer. You couldn't even get a pro bono lawyer. There's so many lawyers for the arts and people who help every artist in the world. You actually could not find one lawyer who would help you pro bono.
Well, the thing is, to be honest, I had, as again, it's sort of who I am. Once I found out that I could sue this, and again, you know, the time was really pressing as far as, you know, the inauguration was coming up. And so I was like, well, I'm going to have to do this, and I'm going to do this myself. If I can do this, I'm going to do this myself. And it was, again, part of being challenged by the whole ordeal. And so finding a lawyer for me was not really on my radar, to just pursue people to then say, oh, come and help me and do this. It's like saying, listen, if I can fight this fight, if I can do this myself, I'm going to learn, I'm going to do the research, and I'm going to fight this fight. And that's what I did. And that became like the school of law that I entered into. And that was a challenge to me as well. But I was determined to bring this all the way as far as I could go, because I knew that I had been wronged. I knew that this director had called me off the record, made up all these arbitrary excuses why my painting didn't qualify, which it did. And then I said, you know what, it's a slam dunk for me. They showed the Obama Hope poster, and yet she objected to my painting as being too political. And it's like, well, the law is very clear. Once the government says that any political art can be shown, they are obligated under the First Amendment to show all political art. They can't discriminate against any viewpoint that's political. So I had a clear-cut case.
Let's go on, but I wanted you to say, if you could just go by step to step. So where did you file your case first? It was in New York State,
No,
right?
in the District of Columbia, in the district court.
So the first ruling that I read was from the District of Columbia?
Correct, yep, at the district court.
Did you go down in person to file?
No, I did at the Supreme Court, but the rest was by mail, yep.
Okay, tell us a little about that process. How did you find out where to file and how to file?
That, again,
and what to
I mean,
say?
yeah, thank God for Google, because I was able to scurry through the internet and find all of the answers and try. I filed in the wrong court at first, you know, because I didn't know and I was just learning. But then I found the correct court, and I managed to have my filing transferred by this judge. It was a great moment in my story, because in his transferring my case, it was already validating my arguments. And then I ended up in the district court, which was where I was supposed to be. And that became a whole ordeal. That went on for probably a year and a half, until until Judge Trevor McFadden dismissed my case. And if you read the ruling carefully, it is bizarre. Judge McFadden basically nationalized the private trust that the Smithsonian Institution is with a stroke of his pen. He converted the entity status of the Smithsonian from a private, it's not a government organization, into a government nationalized organization.
Now, this is one of the themes of your book, but what is the status of the Smithsonian? Is it a government agency? Is it a private nonprofit corporation? It's sort of a hybrid of both. But before we go to that, one of the other interesting things you did is you looked up all sorts of precedents, looking at Google. This is not the first time the Smithsonian has been sued, is it?
No, there are not many lawsuits against the Smithsonian, and the precedents that I found were in not against the Smithsonian. One was against Amtrak, which was, I think, the best case that I had, and then the other one was against it was against the Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania, for the trust that was entrusted to them as well. So I found two lawsuits in particular absolutely vindicated my claims. And the Smithsonian is, so that question, what you mentioned before, it's a bit of both, and it's government and private. I have those quotes from, Chief Justice Howard Taft, who was Chancellor of the Smithsonian back in the 1920s, quoted by a speech from Chief Justice Warren Burger in the 70s, who was also Chancellor of the Smithsonian Institution, where it clearly says the Smithsonian is not and has never been a part of the government. It is basically a private trust under the guardianship of the government. It has nothing to do with the government. It's only taken care of by the government. That's what the only government involvement. The best way to illustrate it is like that the Smithsonian is like a glove, and the government is like the hand that goes inside the glove and makes the glove work. But the glove, the Smithsonian Institution, is a private institution. The government just disappears once they put the glove on, and they just animate this private trust. That's all it is. It has no, and that's clearly stated by Chief Justice Howard Taft, and then echoed by Warren Burger. It has never been a part of the federal government.
But if that's the case, then it undercuts your argument that the First Amendment or anything else applies vis-a-vis the government, because
that's the incredible part of those two cases that I cited, especially the Girard Trust case. In that case, quoted in the Amtrak case, the Supreme Court clearly said that when a trust, for example, like the Smithsonian or like the Girard Trust case, has a government-appointed board, and this Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution is appointed by the government, then it qualifies under the First Amendment. It says it there in black and white. Those cases were vindicated. They won and prevailed that even though this Girard Trust was a private trust, identical to the Smithsonian, because it had a government-appointed board, it qualified under the First Amendment. And I argued
this is a very interesting point you're making, because and I think in England they're called quangos. In America, they're called public-private partnerships. But this model of government funding of private nonprofit entities is very widespread, whether it's the Federal Reserve, whether it's the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, whether it's a million other organizations out there. The federal role is everywhere. And if you had such a precedent in your case, it would have application to many, many, many more things.
It would, but the interesting thing about the Smithsonian and the funding was that the Smithsonian never should have had or never should receive government funding. The original $515,000 in it was actually in 1836 when they started getting the money. That money, that seed money that was held in trust by the government, right there in the act of the Smithsonian, the government actually borrows that money from the trust for its own uses, and then promises to pay 6% interest on that money a year, which they ended up using to build the Smithsonian in 1846. The point about the federal monies is that the Smithsonian had private monies. It never needed federal funding. All of those issues of once the federal funding started to sort of seep into this private trust, that created the problem. That created the illusion that, hold on, this is a government agency getting federal appropriations, like saying, well, that's part of the problem. It never should have had government funding. It's a private institution that had its own funds. It could have gone on to solicit private funds and private donations and function totally as an independent private organization. That's one of those arguments in that press release that I sent you. Is like, the property of the Smithsonian, it belongs to the Smithsonian. It does not belong to the federal government. None of the properties of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., all those massive buildings on the mall, they are all owned by the Smithsonian Trust, not the federal government.
Well, so you find this very fascinating, but de facto, it seemed you were in a lose-lose situation. If they were private, they could say, well, we're a private organization like Google says, or YouTube, or Facebook, or any of the social media things we say, we can do whatever we want. On the other hand, if it's a federal agency, they can turn around to you and play the bureaucratic games that the federal government always plays when they don't want to give an answer. And there's no way to win. So why don't you go? So you filed your legal case. You've been rejected. You've now going to file an appeal. So how did you file your appeal?
I again, the research, finding the right court, finding out what is, and there's a lot of rules and rules of civil procedure, and then there's new rules. Every court had their own rules, down to the typing and how you had to set the font. Everything was every court was different. You had to get it exactly right. Now, as a self-represented person, they actually gave me a little bit of grace that if I did make a mistake, they would work with me. If you're a lawyer, they like throw you off the boat, if you get it wrong. But I managed to, every time I managed to fulfill the requirements.
Now, first you were in the district court. What was your second court?
The Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. And that was the Court of Appeals at the time that Merrick Garland was actually presiding over. And so there was a whole, and that was the District Court of Appeals that John Roberts presided over before he was appointed to the Supreme Court. So that's
now. Did Merrick Garland read your case?
Oh, I have no idea. The three judge panel at first that rejected it, they rejected it saying that argument, like you said before. They said that, and I said a funny part in the book where I think they're actually insulting me because I'm like the dog in the court. I'm this self-represented nobody causing all this trouble. But they said, oh, well, he can't be right because the First Amendment doesn't apply to private institutions. And there I had quoted from the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, when these private institutions have government-appointed boards, they must comply with the First Amendment. I'm like, how in the world? But I learned, Larry, that these judges can choose to see things, as you said before, the bureaucratic system, when they want to see things a certain way, it doesn't matter what it says. They'll just read it the way they want to read it. And I couldn't believe it, to be honest with you. I couldn't believe. And I started to think, I said, are they doing this deliberately because they want to bump it up to an appeal to the Supreme Court to let the Supreme Court sort out this mess? Because how can they deny such black and white Supreme Court precedent that said, if it is a private organization, like a private trust with a government-appointed board, it must obey the First Amendment and the U.S. Constitution. That was the whole argument in that Girard case, which was an amazing example of how they had to follow the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment in that case.
And what's interesting in this case of the Smithsonian, there's widespread viewpoint discrimination at every level.
That's been going on for years. I cataloged that in the book. There's others. The story of Richard von Sternberg, the microbiologist who was basically, tarred and feathered and chased out of the institute. That's outrageous what happened to that man. Absolutely. And they investigated and that was covered in the documentary Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed by Ben Stein. And what he experienced and how he did everything according to the book, and he followed procedure, and he did everything that was required of him. And they even investigated him after they threw him out, and they concluded he did no wrong after they had conspired against him and assassinated him basically in his career, chased him out of this. All those scientists that did that to him, they're still working there now on the government dime, still making a living on that paycheck. And then you
stumbled in like a Hitchcock character into something you didn't know anything about,
right?
That was like a intricate web that you, as sort of an innocent everyman who just wanted to show your painting because you were so proud of it, and you had no idea what you were getting into. So let's talk about this. So you've gone now to the Court of Appeals. It's gone to a 3-judge panel. They've dismissed your case. So what do you do next?
Within the same court, there's another appeal process that puts you before all 16 judges in that same appeals court. They rejected it as well. They didn't say anything. They just said goodbye. Basically,
Wait,
no.
So how did that work? Did you actually have to file, or did you just check
No,
the
you
box?
had to you had to refile again and put it into the court en banc. It's called, when that's the whole court sitting there, and
So
they
if
just
all
toss me to
16 judges saw your case and Merrick Garland was the presiding judge, we now know that Merrick Garland saw your case and
Very
dismissed
possible.
it.
Very
Or-
possible. Yep.
Or he was derelict in his duty. So take your pick. Okay.
Yeah,
So you've
very,
now
very
run
possible.
You've now run into Merrick Garland, who is certainly no friend of President Trump. He's kicking you out. So now what do you do?
Well, now at that time, before I was really discouraged with the dismissal at the district court level, I was devastated. I couldn't believe what I had experienced, but I was getting better at what I was doing. So now I was more energized. I was like, well, I'm going to the Supreme Court. It doesn't matter if they toss me, I'm going there anyway. And the minute they did, I then did the research on how to file. And again, now at the Supreme Court, it was absolutely like you can't even miss a comma or this has to be filed in all the specific ways. And I did. And I personally filed the petition for certiorari, as it is, petition for cert, as they call it. And I did it in person at the court. It was an amazing experience with my daughter.
But could you just describe step by step how you found how to do it, and then how you filled out the forms, and then how you walked it up and filed it, and who received it from you, and what did they say?
Obviously, yeah, with the 9 justices, each one needed a copy, and there was a copy for the clerk. And then the paperwork that went with that had to explain how the case had come through the courts, and you had to there was the argument of why the court should consider your petition and what you had been through. And First Amendment cases have precedent always in the courts. They always should be taken. And even in the lower court, in the Court of Appeals, the court is under an obligation that if there is a First Amendment claim, they have to do a specific, very particular review of the case because of that issue. It's a speech issue. They never did that. And then once it went up to the Supreme Court, again, it's a First Amendment speech case. They had to hear it. Now, the Supreme Court, their job in the case was just to say what the law is. Basically, I'm saying there is a problem with the definition of the Smithsonian Institution, that the lower courts have got it completely wrong, and they did it deliberately to deny me my speech rights. The Supreme Court now, no case has ever gone against the Smithsonian to the Supreme Court. Mine was the first lawsuit against the Smithsonian Institution to reach the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was asking them to weigh in on the question of the Smithsonian entity status. What is the Smithsonian Institution? You need to define it so that it can obey the laws, because no laws right now apply to the Smithsonian Institution because
now, let
of its
me stop you
confusing
again.
status.
Let me stop you again. Okay, so you're submitting your case to the Supreme Court. You're appealing to the Supreme Court. Now, of course, Justice John Roberts is Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and he's also Chancellor of the Smithsonian Institution, head of the Board of Regents. Now, what happened there? He recused himself, is that right?
He did, yeah. And in the letter denying me my petition for cert, it specifically says that the Chief Justice had no part in the consideration of whether they take my case or not. They didn't say anything else. They didn't say who did or didn't, because it takes 4 thumbs up out of the 9 justices when they meet and have their conference to consider which cases they take. Out of the 9, it requires 4 to say we're going to take this case. And it didn't say whether I got a single vote or not. It doesn't say that. So I don't know whether the conservative justices, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch at that time, whether they had given me any approval. It didn't say that. I just got no, Chief Justice did not partake in this. Goodbye, you're done.
Although it's very unusual for the Chief Justice to recuse himself from a case. Yet I didn't see much news coverage of it at the time.
No, I had good coverage leading up to that point. I had that front page story in the Washington Times, which I thought was absolutely amazing. They put it bang smack on the front page. But I got, at that time, that article, Larry, and that's how you and I became friends, is that one story that was front page in DC. I got 1 email of support from that front page news article, and it was from you. and I am forever grateful for that, because this is a peculiar journey that I'm on, that God brings people into this story in ways. It's just one person, and that you became somebody that was extremely encouraging to me on this journey, and I am forever grateful for that, Larry.
Well, I'm grateful you wrote this book. I got a warning that we're running out of time. At 30 minutes, we have 10 minutes. When it ends, if we keep going, we'll take a break, like a commercial break, and come back. But I'm very interested. So you file your petition with the Supreme Court, and they don't give you any reasons. They don't give you any votes. They just say it's denied. But then they have like a footnote or something that say Justice Roberts did. Who signed it?
Yep. It's a very short letter, and it just says, no, it's the clerk of the court signed it.
And is this in your book, this letter?
The letter is online. It's available at the website. I don't believe I put I might have. I can't remember at this second.
All right, well, I'd like to get a copy. If you could send me the link afterwards, I'll put a link in the comments so people can read it, because I think that's a historic document right there, because something funny is going on with that, in my opinion, because the very fact that he recused himself, in my view, means they should have considered your case.
Well, the question, Larry, the question that I am asking and ask the Supreme Court exists to answer controversies of law, especially federal controversies of law. And their job is to say, according to Madison versus Marbury, that historic case, it was to say what the law is. Their job was to define the law when there is a problem in Congress, when there's a problem with laws that are made. It goes to the Supreme Court for them to say, this is the law, is this constitutional, this is not constitutional. It's their job. And my question is an unanswered question of federal law. It has never been answered. No court case had reached the Supreme Court. Never had someone questioned this entity confusing status of the Smithsonian. Nobody knows what it is. The court in my case got it completely. They butchered the law. When you read the law, they butchered the law. Judge McFadden, who was a brand new judge at the time, he made stuff up. He didn't, when he made his decision, in his memorandum, he didn't quote any laws. He didn't quote what laws the Smithsonian should abide by. He made it up. He just made all these declarative statements, basically legislating from the bench. He made it up, and they had to do that. He sided with the DOJ because it was the only way that their arguments could deprive me of my speech rights. So there's a question. Are there free speech rights for beneficiaries of the will of Jane Smithson and citizens of the United States in the Smithsonian Institution or not? It's a question of federal law that's never been answered. And
Let me ask you another question.
They refuse to answer it, Larry.
Wait, I want to ask you another question. You just said the DOJ filed on behalf of the Supreme Court. I mean, on behalf of the Smithsonian Institution. The DOJ at that point was Republican, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was under what's his name, who eventually resigned. I appealed to him personally as well.
Sessions.
So, I appealed to him. I wrote to him as well because I'm like, he was
a Trump administration, Department of Justice, Attorney General Sessions, siding with the Smithsonian, headed by Justice Roberts, to exclude a picture of President Trump from the Trump campaign after he's won this historic victory, just as a historical artifact. You don't have to judge its aesthetic
exactly.
And let me ask you another question. So, were you surprised by the Republican response?
I by this time I was like, I'm dumbfounded. I was thinking, I think I'm just naive half the time because I don't know. I've not experienced this before, and I always give people the benefit of the doubt. You think they're going to you think they're going to be upright. You think they're going to be conscientious. You think they're going to do the right thing because it's that you think I'm a newborn American citizen. I love this country. I swore this oath to the U.S. Constitution. You're excited, like, yeah, they're going to be like champions. And Sessions at the time was traveling the country, speaking at all these universities where they were barring free speech. And so I wrote him this appeal. And I said, well, here you are, you're traveling the country in support of all this free speech, and they're stopping all these, celebrities speaking on campus and all this stuff. I said, well, here's me. And artistic political free speech is one of the highest rungs on the free speech ladder, of importance. And I'm here with my case, and I'm looking for nothing. Never got a reply, never got any support. And obviously because the DOJ is defending the Smithsonian. And it's like, it's wonderful how this case is it's so unprecedented. It's never happened before. And I think that what maybe I experience is that these people, because of that, they rather would be silent and say, we don't really care about this guy. He's nobody. We don't care about his rights, because right now the status quo cannot be destabilized, and we're not going to
If you
give him a
don't care of
voice.
the rights of a nobody, then they don't care about the rights of a somebody. And you can see how they treat President Trump the same way you were treated, which is sort of ironic. One other thing, and then we'll have to go into a break and come back.
Okay.
You did get, I asked David Horowitz, who I used to work for the name of a lawyer to help you. He gave me the name of Cleta Mitchell, who does a lot of election law. She's a very big lawyer, very tied in with the Trumps. And you didn't get much of a response there either. Is that right?
No, well, I at that time because I had filed already at the U.S. Supreme Court, the best thing that I could have got was representation if they were willing to have me as like co-counsel, because I didn't want to just put down my sword and let someone else fight for me, because I said, and even though in the US Supreme Court, I could no longer, even if I got to argue my case, I had to have a lawyer. They no longer allow pro se litigants to argue in the Supreme Court, which is a shame. But I also was asking for those amicus briefs, which are where, lawyers will stand next to you and write an agreement saying, yeah, this case needs to be heard at the Supreme Court. And the fact that it was maybe too late in the game, people are very busy. People didn't have time to get involved. I don't know. I mean, I just speculating, but it's
so
my fight
no
to
amicus
fight.
brief. You
No.
got no amicus brief. You didn't get help from the Republicans, and you didn't get help from the liberals with their free speech foundations.
No, and that was weird, Larry.
Words, you were one man alone, like Spartacus,
Yeah,
against everyone.
It did feel like that. It was very lonely at times and very discouraging. I went through a lot of dark periods of just very discouraging. And even upstate here in New York, none of the people I had all these glowing letters of application support from all these politicians in upstate New York. They all knew that I was fighting this lawsuit. None of them, even Congressman Reed, who was at the time, he's no longer, he had to resign in disgrace. But I had appealed to him, and not that I said, just make this an issue in Congress. You're a trustee of the Smithsonian. Congress is the principal trustee of the Smithsonian Trust. You guys can make an argument. You can compel the clarification necessary in the law of the Smithsonian, the Act of 1846. I said, make it an issue on the floor of Congress. But nothing, no support,
okay.
Nothing.
We have to stop there and come back. That's a good point. That we're talking about odious. I can't
and
say
Cerberus.
Cerberus.
Odious and Cerberus.
Cerberus is the dog here who guards the gates of hell. For those of you who know, I guess you're the odious one, unless they're odious. I don't know. You'll tell us in the second half. This book, go and buy it. You can watch the second half after during that.
No, odious has come from the judge, Larry. That's from the federal judge.
We gotta go, and we'll be right back. Okay.